Let's start with North Korea. We're hearing from Secretary of Defense General Jim Mattis for the first time since President Trump's fire and fury remarks Tuesday from his golf club in New Jersey. In a statement, General Mattis says in part, quote, "The United States and our allies have the demonstrated capabilities and unquestionable commitment to defend ourselves from an attack. The DPRK, North Korea, should cease any consideration of actions that would lead to the end of its regime and the destruction of its people." While our State Department is making every effort to resolve the global threat through diplomatic means, it must be noted that the combined allied militaries now possess the most precise, rehearsed, and robust defensive and offensive capabilities on Earth. The DPRK regime's actions will continue to be grossly overmatched by ours and would lose any arms race or conflict it initiates, end quote. Meanwhile, the North Korean Army has released a new statement through its state-run media saying it will deliver a plan to attack the U.S. territory of Guam to leader Kim Jong-un by the middle of this month and then wait for his decision. The Army says the plan consists of firing 4 ballistic missiles over Japan into waters 18 to 25 miles off the coast of Guam. The statement also goes directly after President Trump, saying that his fire and fury rhetoric is, quote, "a load of nonsense," and that, quote, "sound dialogue is not possible since Trump is, quote, bereft of reason." David Ignatius, a lot to sift through there. We ended yesterday's show where we asked you what to look for over the next 24 hours. The rhetoric only stepped up from what we saw yesterday, and you had what we saw at the top of the show, which was an administration and a State Department sort of scrambling in behind the initial remarks of fire and fury by President Trump to speak, as the State Department spokesman said, in one voice.
I think what we've seen since that very inflammatory rhetoric is a recognition that President Trump has to be careful that his language doesn't frighten friends and allies, doesn't frighten the Chinese so much that they end up pulling back from cooperation with the U.S. on the diplomacy that it would like to see as a resolution of this. The other thing that we've seen that I think may be very significant is this North Korean threat to attack Guam, a U.S. territory, a fairly short flight. The missiles would fly over Japan and land near Guam. I think, from what I'm hearing, that the administration is making this test, this additional test coming so close to U.S. territory, really a test of the larger strategy. If the North Koreans attempt to strike near U.S. territory, I think there will be repercussions. I think the round of diplomacy, among other things, will come to a screeching halt. What the State Department is looking for the North Koreans to say, no, we won't test. Instead, we're willing to begin talks about denuclearization. If they go ahead with the test, it's a North Korean defiant announcement. They're going their own way.
So, David, what role did the president's incendiary comments the other day play, do you think, or do you hear from your reporting, in the North Koreans seemingly ratcheting up very quickly their response with regard to, attacking Guam?
Mike, I think in this rhetorical back and forth, the North Koreans did what you'd expect. I mean, President Trump was speaking Kim Jong-un language, and he was received in kind. The reaction that concerns me more is among the countries we would have to fight with. We're now talking about war in the Korean Peninsula. That's a war that you have to conduct with very close relations with your allies, especially South Korea, especially Japan, to some extent Australia. I'm just going to read you some numbers that I found last night in a late June Pew Research poll. Confidence in the U.S. president to do the right thing regarding world affairs has fallen in South Korea since Donald Trump took office from 71 to 17. That's a fall of 75 points. In Japan, it's fallen from 78 to 24, a fall of 54 points, almost identical in Australia. So these are countries which would have to be our partners that are already worried. These polls were taken before we were in this phase of fire and fury. Now I think there's even greater anxiety. The problem is if the anxiety isn't controlled, our allies are going to be reluctant to do the things we need them to do. We cannot do this attack alone.
Clint, you served some time in South Korea. We were just talking about what it was like there almost 20 years ago. It's been tense since the Korean War, of course, along the DMZ, but what it must have been like to be in Seoul in leadership, or to be in Tokyo. What do you think is going through the mind of the allies that David Ignatius is referencing here?
Yeah, we're talking about nuclear standoff. There is a lot short of nuclear standoff. And when I remember rising up in a helicopter in Seoul, you can see the border. You're within artillery range. You're talking about lots of other threats that can manifest. We've seen North Korea over the past 2 years greatly expand their cyber attack capability. We've seen attacks on U.S. companies, U.S. banking systems. So even this rhetoric in the nuclear space, when North Korea feels challenged, they're going to offset in other ways and be more aggressive in other ways. We've seen Kim Jong-un assassinate members of his own family outside the country in recent months. So this sort of tossing out fire and fury, these statements to appear tough, fine. If you're North Korea, you will take that challenge, and it helps him reinforce his base that they're under threat from the United States, and you'll see actions in other ways. So we're talking about nuclear specific, but if you're North Korea now, you start to pinprick the U.S. and the allies who are now breaking away from us in ways that you might not expect.
And Sam, far from backing away from what the president said 2 days ago at Bedminster, the administration yesterday, as we showed in the State Department, falling in behind him. It's almost like he set this new bar and they have to rise up to meet it.
Well, we reported, among other outlets at the Daily Beast, that this was ad-libbed. That it was a piece of paper in front of him, but those comments were about the opioid crisis, which was ostensibly the point of that event, and he ad-libbed, and he used some catchphrases that he tends to use, the likes of which the world has never seen, as a classic Donald Trump one. And that set the tone for the rest of the administration. I was told, our Daily Beast was told, that the Secretary of State's office had no clue that this was coming. It's very clear in the responses from other elements of the government that they were not cued in on this. And it's an odd way to go about setting nuclear deterrent policy. I don't know if it's an effective way. But to David's point, one of the things that we should note is that we don't have critical ambassadors in key posts in that region right now. We have acting secretaries and acting ambassadors, South Korea, East Asian, Pacific Affairs, nuclear non-proliferation offices in the State Department. They're just vacant. I was talking to a friend of the show, Richard Haas, about this, and the analogy that he gave was that this is the equivalent of playing a World Series game with, 3 less starters in the opposition. So we are really going into this, kind of blind.
And Casey, this is all bubbled up with Congress away on its August recess. What kind of reaction have you been able to collect? We've heard from John McCain and a few other prominent senators. What's the feeling in Congress right now?
I mean, I think, honestly, the sense from talking to people behind the scenes is the same as I think everybody that is kind of watching this unfold, which is to say there's a great deal of uncertainty and nervousness. I mean, I think McCain was pretty careful in his criticism in saying, okay, I don't want to step out in front of the president necessarily and say that he shouldn't, he should be doing this or taking that off the table, but that this rhetoric, you better be able to back that up. If you're saying this kind of thing, you better absolutely mean it. I think Lindsey Graham gave the president more cover. I mean, Graham and McCain, honestly, have both tended to favor military options in the past. But I think for a lot of Democrats, I mean, Chuck Schumer put out a one-line statement about this that essentially said, we need to worry about North Korea, but we really shouldn't talk this way. And I think there was kind of a level of fear underneath that statement that is pretty common among members of Congress.
Can I ask David a question? Because I have heard one argument, and I don't know how much I buy it, but that there is a utility to Trump saying this stuff. And I was talking with David that the notion that the North Koreans might think that this is a bit of a madman who could be triggered to do something actually can itself be a deterrent. If you're talking about a nuclear standoff. There was a similar vibe, I guess, if you want to say, about Richard Nixon, for instance, and even to a certain extent Ronald Reagan, that you never knew if they were actually going to hit the button. And I'm wondering, among the people you talk to, is this an argument that's being pushed? Does it have resonance? Is it logical?
I think, Sam, this idea we sometimes shorthanded the madman theory, that people think this guy would do anything, it does have some utility. The most important audience, as we were discussing yesterday, may in fact be China. The whole guiding theme of this strategy is that we're saying to China, this is so important to us The North Korean nuclear missiles are intolerable to the president. Either you help us deal with it diplomatically, or we're going to deal with it ourselves militarily in a way that's disastrous for you. And that depends on the Chinese believing we really mean it. We do it and create a real mess for them in the country next door.
And Sam, to your point, the president retweeted a quote from a Fox host last night where the Fox host said, POTUS being unpredictable is a big asset. North Korea knew exactly what President Obama was going to do.
Well, he shouldn't tweet that.
And Donald Trump retweeted that. In other words, that's kind of, I think, what you're saying.
It is
Maybe
what I'm
not
saying.
madman, but unpredictability is what he wants out
But
there.
if you tweet that you're unpredictable, then
Well,
you're giving away the
it sort of gives away the
script. Come on,
unpredictability.
Trump.
Exactly. Mike?
David, in speaking with a few people in Washington yesterday, I was struck by their fear that this is less than rational behavior coming out of the Oval Office, not the White House, but the Oval Office. And that the fear is that the ratcheting up of the language, and in General Hayden's words in the New Yorker magazine, that President Trump has little interest in the world. Their fear is that the accidental start of a war could easily occur.
I'm hearing that same fear, Mike, and I think the president is just sort of racing toward the brink here, introducing the language evocative of nuclear war, fire and fury. Did he really understand what he was doing, taking the country, taking the world so deep into the world's ultimate nightmare? An interesting thing I read last night, it's a piece in the Washington Post by my former colleague Michael Dobbs, who covered the Soviet Union for many years, has written a book about the Cuban Missile Crisis. He noted on the eve of the Cuban Missile Crisis, President John F. Kennedy was reading a book called The Guns of August, which is how World War I happened without anybody really intending it to. It was about miscalculation, error, misjudgment that led to the slaughter of World War I. That's what Jack Kennedy was thinking about as he entered the decisive phase of his presidency. What's Donald Trump thinking about? I think he's thinking about, gosh, what's a really strong rhetorical way to show these North Koreans I mean it? A very different mindset, and I hope that people will say to the president, you need to take this in a very sober way. This is about nuclear war.
Maybe we could get John Hersey's Hiroshima on books on tape and ship it to Bedminster, and he could at least listen to it rather than, I guess he doesn't read a lot of books, but he could listen to books on tape.
I'll pay half.
It's an incredible piece. Anybody would read that today would certainly stop inciting things towards war. My God.
We're going to come back to North Korea in just a moment.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.